Welcome to Chart Chat. In this series, we look at the subject's chart for the first time and share our initial reactions. This is not meant to be a comprehensive dive into the chart, but rather an intuitively led discussion of our first impressions and what we know about the person already.
So we're going to take a look at Bob Saget's chart. Rest in peace. We lost him just very recently. He holds a very special place in my heart as Danny Tanner. I was so obsessed with Full House, even though I was born in 97 and it's not totally really my era. I was obsessed with Full House. I loved it. And so I also definitely know Bob Saget from America's Funniest Home Videos. Definitely saw him on there quite a bit. And I do also know him as being like a very crass comedian. He's totally known for that. But then it also became really apparent when he passed away so suddenly that he was really beloved. Like he had stayed in touch with his Full House cast members and was like a father to the Olsen twins. And even like when they did the revamp of the show Fuller House, it sounds like, he just was so loved and like was really like a father to all those people. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at his chart. This is the first time I'm seeing it.
I'm so excited by this pick. You have no idea.
Good, okay.
I have to admit that I have glanced at it, but not enough to do any real processing. Okay. So it sounds like these will be very initial impressions for both of us.
Good. Okay.
The first thing that jumps out to me when this lands on screen is the fixed grand cross that he's rocking here. Yes. Between the four fixed signs and that basically red box that makes on his chart.
Yep.
I do go in depth on those in the first episode of Betty White's Unique Astrology because she has a ton of those too. So like if you're wanting more in depth, I definitely put that in there, but essentially it's just like a massive amount of tension that arises, especially the fixed grand cross is like staying power, basically. Like once you get momentum going, it's like a locomotive that's like impossible to stop.
What I am most familiar with a grand cross is I know that Steve Jobs had one of those. And, people like to say grand cross is, bad, like it's a curse or something. And it's, it's never like that in astrology. But he did, Steve Jobs did tragically pass away at a young age from cancer. And before that, of course, he had achieved like such success. So there's high highs and low lows, it seems, with a grand cross. Sometimes, maybe. Yeah. Because I don't know, with Betty White, not so much, but yeah, interesting.
I know it's like every single square or opposition, which in a grand cross, there's just a lot, like all in one place, but every single one of those lines that's red is adding a layer of tension, which in my opinion, like growth comes out of tension. So the potential is huge, but like Abraham Hicks says in her teachings, it's like, if you hit a tree and you're going 5 miles an hour, it's not that big a deal. If you're going 100 miles an hour and you hit a tree, it's a really big deal. So there's just a lot of power present with all that tension. And it's like, if you don't figure out how to channel it, then yeah, it's like going to blow up in your face or manifest as depression or any number of things where basically it's unchanneled energy. And I think that's maybe why Betty White lived so long, because her balance, like all those grand crosses, she had cardinal and fixed grand crosses, both were present in her chart. And
staying power. Yeah.
She figured out how to channel it, which that was kind of, the magic trick, which I think Bob Saget did too. I think his comedy, which the style of comedy is very interesting. And the fact that he's a comedian in general, especially when you look at like Pluto conjunct Jupiter up there in Leo, like right at the top of his chart. So that's kind of that most seen part of our personality is like the top of the chart, but it's in the ninth house, which is about like higher learning and like what big picture understanding. And
Yeah,
yeah, so
totally.
Pluto conjunct Jupiter in Leo, that was going to be like just a big presence, regardless of what
Definitely. Yeah.
stage he put himself on.
Yeah, very interesting because I think the ninth house is also associated with Sagittarius, right?
Yes.
So we've got like Leo, fiery Leo in this fiery Sagittarius realm. That's really interesting. And then if you scoot over just a little bit to the left, there's his moon. And it's interesting to have that so close. It's like his heart is right there with it
Yes.
and
That's
still in the ninth house.
that's a common artist placement, I feel, is when the moon is on the midheaven. It's like your emotions are literally the source of your soul's work. Like it's all kind of one piece of energy. Um, so yeah, that Virgo midheaven or MC line, and then his Virgo moon is, yeah, very interesting. Virgo, just kind
Virgo
of
moon.
contemplating a Virgo midheaven as a comedian.
I always think, with Virgo, there's that element of service.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like he was like, just the way he was so beloved by everyone he worked with. Um, like he was doing a service in that sense, like by having his heart on his sleeve in that way. And yeah, I don't know what you think about it, but I think he was definitely serving.
Yeah. Well, and like making people laugh, that is a huge service. And again, I go back to, I'm pretty sure Betty White's moon is in Virgo as well. That's not her
Interesting.
midheaven, but she does have a Virgo moon where it's like through laughter that breaks tension, that calms the nerves, it soothes ourselves. Like laughter is powerful medicine. So I know Virgo
Yeah.
is tied to health and like physical wellness and our daily routine and kind of all of those things. So yeah, I mean, I like you said about Full House. I mean, I came home, got off the bus after school and like watched the Full House and Saved by the Bell reruns. That was like part of my daily routine. And I do believe that making people laugh is a huge service and a health-based service. Maybe a teeny bit of a stretch there,
Yes.
but not really, that's
I
medicine.
mean, laughter really is the best medicine. Like that's a common saying, and I 100% believe in that. It's so true. They even say like the act of laughing is like a form of breath work. Like
Yeah.
it's really healing, and to make people laugh, I mean, that's just like what an amazing service.
Yeah.
Especially like to be on a show that's mostly made for kids and like families. That's another kind of level of service, I think, is like he had his like very crass side of his comedy, and then there's like Full House, Danny Tanner. And that's like the full spectrum of making everyone laugh, all ages.
Right. I do see that playing out too through like his Virgo midheaven, which Virgo is, like you said, very much of service and attention to detail and earth energy. So that one seems like more the kids' side of his work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then compared to the Scorpio rising, where like that's really like his face into the world when you drop down to like his Saturn at 29 degrees Scorpio and his North Node in Sagittarius, like he's really kind of built for some pretty massive like emotional pain and maybe backlash over his beliefs, that like working through that is part of his spiritual evolution journey.
Yeah. Interesting, because he's also got some stuff going on in his eighth house, which is associated with Scorpio.
Totally.
And he has Cancer there in his eighth house. And, it's kind of Cancer is sort of the more motherly energy. And the eighth house is, I think, sometimes associated. This might be a thing in my head, but I think it's associated with like mothers and mother wounds and kind of along those lines. Which I don't know how the mother stuff plays into it, but tender Cancer is such a like tender energy. It's sensitive and it's very feeling, deep feeling. And then he's got Venus in there. And then what am I looking at? What's that? Neptune?
Uranus.
Uranus?
Is
Uranus,
the
yes.
one.
I think those ones.
Does it, if you scroll down, does it give you the table, the list?
Oh, yeah.
I want to
Ooh,
see
yes.
where those.
This.
So Uranus is at 29 degrees. Saturn is at 29 degrees. So 29 is the anaretic degree, and it's like completion and the end of a cycle and mastery. And there's so much wrapped up karmically when you have planets or points at 29 degrees or 0 degrees for that matter. And so he's got Saturn and Uranus at
Wow. Yeah.
29 degrees of
Neptune,
Scorpio.
28.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that 28 like counts the same as 29.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it's all very arbitrary in the grand scheme of things. I got to think the higher the degree of the placement, like the more advanced the lesson kind of thing is how I interpret it, and kind of where you can feel for yourself. You know, do you feel like someone who's mastering the energy or someone who's just getting started? Like my rising sign's at 0 degrees Taurus, and that makes a lot of sense to me because Taurus is a bit of a reach, you know? It is somewhat ingrained as my rising sign, but it's also very unconscious and like a brand new baby muscle that 0 degree placement, like it's ready to be worked. But I don't have a whole lot of experience with it versus 29 degrees of a sign. You've done that before, maybe a couple times. And so he's got, yeah, Cancer and Scorpio. So both of his 29 degree placements are in water. So yeah, you put that together with that Virgo midheaven of service, and it's like he had some real love inside of him that was ultimately trying to be expressed, I think, through his work.
Definitely. And with Scorpio, I mean, definitely like maybe some pain and some darkness that needed to find a healthy expression. And like we said, like what healthier expression that is there than comedy and like making people laugh, taking what's kind of dark and, you know, maybe less positive or, you know, whatever inside of you and finding a healthy expression for that is that feels like a level of mastery.
Yeah. Channeling it, you know, getting the good out of it no matter what, which is also very Scorpionic. Like Scorpio covers the full range of human emotions, and he's got his rising and Saturn. Saturn's like our course of study. We're going to like really focus into this and try to live it at its highest expression. And that is an acceptance of the full range of human emotions, the good and the bad. And life includes all of that. And I do know from just a little bit of coverage that I watched about his life that he's lost siblings. Like a couple of his sisters died really young, both through their own kind of unexpected circumstances and caught them off guard. So that's happened like twice out of the blue. Like you lose your sister that is so important to you. So like that loss. Scorpio also like talks about attachments. So anytime I see Saturn in Scorpio, I automatically think loss, because the whole point is that you're working through grieving. You're working through like the darkest of the dark human emotions. And to get to grief, you have to first love, and then you need to lose. And now there's grief. And that sucks. But like that kind of a placement, it's like it's also that Saturn at 29 is trining that blue line up to the 29 degree Uranus in Cancer, which is about like nurturing and loving and supporting and giving life and mothering, like you said. Like, yeah. So, I mean, it's not for nothing. Like, I think he did want to channel his own pain into like what he put out into the world.
Yeah. That's really like touching, you know, and it seems to really speak to the type of person he was.
Yeah.
It's interesting too. I think that's his north node down there in Sagittarius, which is not too far from his rising. It's kind of coming up there. And that's again associated with the ninth house, which he's got some stuff going
All of
on
that.
there.
Yeah.
So it's like that's his North Star, you know. it kind of ties back into that ninth house energy. And I do think, like, isn't the ninth house, or maybe I'm mixing this up with the 10th, but I think the ninth house has something to do with like philanthropy. And I know that Bob Saget was a pretty big philanthropist. Like, he was the type to, donate his money to causes he believed in. And, wealth was not, he obviously had, made some money in his time. And it sounds like he, you know, wasn't like hoarding it all for himself or anything. Like, he found outlets for his money too, to like do good.
Yeah.
Very interesting, especially seeing that his sun is in Taurus and it's on his descendant, which to me like generally represents like maybe some of the more shadowy side of like if it's on your descendant. Um, and Taurus has a lot to do with money and wealth and what that really means. So I wonder if maybe there was kind of a progression through his life of like, I have all this money. What do I do with it? What does this mean to me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think the ninth house is associated with just generosity of spirit in general, whether you're giving like material goods or wisdom or just like the act of like giving and sharing and all of that. Like, I think that is very ninth house. So he's got a lot, like you said, going on there already. And then that sun, I was looking at that too, because it's opposite his ascendant, which is a powerful draw no matter what planet you have over there. Um, Also, it's opposite his Saturn, which ties all of like the center of his personality, like ties it directly in opposition in that tense aspect with like him studying his own deepest pain. So it is so fascinating to look at how that anytime you have any planets that are on the descendant, it's like a light that exists inside of you. And all that people can really see when they first meet you is like a magnetic aura. Like there's, because like we're talking about like the rising being like a social face. Like when you go out into the world, like anybody who meets you can feel this about you. And when you have a planet right on your descendant, it's like this magnetic draw that there's like this whole world inside. Like if you want to step inside to this person and like really get to look at them, there's a whole world that you can sense in there. And I get that with Scorpio risings anyway. And then he's also got a planet. Like really that sun is like illuminating that inner world and his like subconscious almost. Like when I think about planets on the descendant out, yes, I think about like the shadow, like you said, but also just like unconsciousness in general.
Mm-hmm.
But to have your sun there, that's the center of your personality. So it's almost like it draws your whole self down into like a more subconscious place in general, plus the Scorpio rising and the Scorpio Saturn. I mean, it just seems like he was maybe way deeper than, especially Danny Tanner and the America's Funniest Videos, like way deeper than that ever got to be seen, but it did its job, which I think is like, he channeled all of this depth into like ultimately what's going to be of value, which is like what that Virgo midheaven is all about. Like Virgo moon, like I want to be of value, I want to be of service. Like how do I actually do that? So it was like almost very strategic to take this emotional depth and turn it into freaking Full House. Like that's genius.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Now I'm looking at like, what is that, his Mars in Aquarius?
Yes, I was just looking at that too.
Like
Yeah.
standing on its own there, yeah.
Well, and that's creating that grand cross, basically. Like it's doing that
Yep.
opposition back to Pluto and Jupiter. It's squaring Saturn, the descendant, and the sun. So yeah, I mean that Mars in Aquarius, that's an independent soul right there. Like that's an independent warrior who's gonna like fight the battle that feels right for him to fight. And the
Exactly.
humanitarian side of Aquarius, when you go back to what you said about the philanthropy and the generosity that he felt for the causes that matter to him. Like that's very Aquarian in nature, it feels.
Definitely, yeah. And just embracing what makes you different, what makes you stand apart, and using that as like your fuel to the fire. And that's your fighting spirit. It's like standing out rather than wanting to fit in. Hmm. Very interesting. Yeah. I guess I don't know, on this chart there's not Chiron, I guess.
Well, and if he was 1956,
Yep, 1956.
I want to say he's getting close to like either Chiron in Pisces or Chiron in Aquarius.
Oh, okay.
Let's actually, let me just Google real quick. We can just edit this part out when I find the answer. Yeah, it was in the early degrees of Aquarius.
Okay. So interesting to have your Mars and your Chiron in the
well,
same.
so that means like it's kind of right on the border between his second and third house. So like on the third house cusp is where it showed that Chiron was in 1956. And so it had a retrograde in there. So hard to say exactly where, if it was in the second or third house, but yeah, to have your Mars and your Chiron in the same sign, the words that sprang to mind just there were self-doubt. Like your Mars and your wounded healer archetype, your wound that kind of never fully gets healed, you just learn how to kind of make it feel better. Like to have your warrior, your source of taking action and asserting yourself in the world in the same sign as your Chiron. I gotta think it just kind of like chops you down to size every once in a while with some self-doubt.
Definitely. Yeah. And I always think too with like the wounded healer is it's taking your pain and using that to help heal the world and heal other people. And just the fact that that's like, pretty connected there, right? Following up this red line here, and it takes you right into his ninth house where we're talking about like, service and philanthropy. And it seems like that might have been a big motivator for him. It's like, maybe I can't heal myself, but I'm going to take this pain and it's going to motivate me to help make the world a better place. And it sounds like he did have a lot of pain, like we were talking about him losing siblings, and, that can't be easy.
That would be really interesting if Chiron was in his third house, because third house rules our siblings. And so, I mean, third house Chiron is said to generate like something of like difficult relationship with your siblings. But from what I understand, like they were really close. And the difficulty was that his sisters passed away suddenly at a young age. So yeah, just also tying that back to that Saturn in Scorpio of like needing to study those dark emotions. Just seems like kind of all of it comes together to give us the tools that we need to do the mission that we need to do. And as we, go through time, it just seems like, it always reminds me of that quote, like the people who try the hardest to make other people happy are the ones who feel the saddest on the inside. It's like they know how bad it hurts to feel bad on the inside, so they try really hard to make other people happy. And so many comedians have this deep emotional nature that they're channeling into helping other people to feel better. And that Virgo moon and Virgo midheaven, it is such a gift. It's such a service that they provide, and hopefully they're appreciated for the value that they're adding.
Totally. And it makes me think too of how sometimes people will tend to use comedy or like trying to make people laugh as a way to kind of keep people away or keep them from really seeing what's deep inside. And that, makes me think of the fact that his sun is there on his descendant, and how that's sort of the center of his personality is so deep within him. And that sometimes, we do that to like push people away from seeing our real deepest, truest selves, is we use comedy or laughter.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, and
it's also a way to invite people in. So it might be a little bit of both.
Yeah. it just makes me want to like let's all look at those people in our lives who make us laugh and who provide the comedic relief. And whether you like express it to them verbally or just, wrap them up in your thoughts in loving awareness, loving kindness, that we appreciate this service of turning pain into medicine and that alchemy that goes on inside these people. And, I think it's great like to see how loved Bob Saget was. I hope that was expressed while he was alive, like, yeah. So be thankful and grateful for these people while they're here, while they're in the middle of giving us our medicine. Yeah. I the show that comes to mind is Schitt's Creek. I've watched it over and over and over and over. That show is absolutely medicine. And I feel like, sending our thankful thoughts towards those creators who channel their lives into their art like that. And yeah, Bob Saget was very much one of those.
So true. I always mix up all these things. But so the seventh house, this has to do with like relationships and marriage, right? Like particularly like partnerships.
Yes, like committed partnerships. So marriage
Right.
and business partnerships also.
Okay. Because I know he has been divorced a couple times. He has children. He was not married when he passed away, I don't think.
I think
No, I don't think. I think they split up a while back.
Really?
Huh? I might be wrong about that.
I think so. That is her name Kelly?
Yeah.
I mean, it says until 2022.
Oh,
And I'm assuming
okay. Then
that's
he was married.
because he's passed. Yeah,
Maybe I
Kelly
was looking at the
Kelly
start date.
Rizzo says 2018 2022.
Okay, so he was married
And then that
at the
first marriage was 82 to 97. And that's who that
Mhm.
lady,
That's the one.
Sherry, that's who he had his kids with.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. It's interesting to see that he has that's Mercury, right?
Yeah.
Mercury and Gemini
Mercury retrograde in Gemini.
in the seventh house. I just wonder if that impacted his marriages, his closest relationships.
Well, and he stayed single for a long time because like he got divorced from his first wife in 1997, and then he didn't get married to Kelly until 2018. So
like
21
20
years
years.
he stayed single, and he said in an interview that he didn't think he would ever get married again. And then he found Kelly, and they're just, perfect, whatever. And yeah, I would think Mercury and Gemini, anytime you have Mercury and Gemini, it just makes you like really into conversations of all kinds. It's a very like intellectual energy. So to put that in the seventh house, I would imagine this relationship, whatever is going to be successful, it's going to have to come with like that conversation component.
Totally.
And be able to have conversations and have open dialogue and learn new things and talk about, no limits, no boundaries to what we can talk about. And there's not a ton of people like that running around in the world, but
Right.
found one, and that's amazing that he did get to
Yeah.
experience that beautiful relationship for these last few years. Yeah, that's
Definitely.
really,
And
really
with
beautiful.
that so close to his descendant also, it like, makes me think that in those relationships, like those people probably did see his, at least very close to his true like inner self that's on that descendant, his son.
Well, because like yeah, so you think like if you're in a committed partnership or a really close relationship with this person, with Bob, then you're getting more the sun in Taurus and the Mercury Gemini. And that's like just a really chill, curious, serene, happy-go-lucky, lighthearted person, like, and then he's got all the rest of this depth to his self and his like entire energy. So he just, that looks like probably the simplest side of him. And yet that Mercury and Gemini, yeah, it's an insatiable, curious cat that never runs out of things to talk about.
Totally. Yeah. And then it's just so close to his Taurus energy, which is, like just that sense of home and comfort. And yeah, I would think he really felt that, like probably in his, relationships and his marriages when they were going. The first one, at least, I have no idea what happened, but in its heyday, it must have felt really comfortable. And
well, it lasted, I mean, a good long while.
Mm-hmm.
So
It did.
like so many of us, he's got so many facets to his energy and who he was and all of those different sides. And when you have a chart that's so spread out like this, and you end up even with like a grand cross or something like that, like figuring out how to balance all of that, I mean, it can take your whole life to figure out like how to be sane in the middle of all of that tension and all of those different sides of you that are wanting to be expressed. So I feel like when you look at his career, you see that he did express himself in lots of different ways, like doing the content for kids, doing the stuff for adults, doing his charity work, all his parenting, all of those things that were important to him. He found room for all of it in his life. And I think that's, ultimately what we all try to practice, finding that balance.
Yeah, finding a way to give expression to those different sides of yourself while not like pinning yourself down in one type or the other, like he was able to be Danny Tanner and Bob Saget, like naughty comedian, like he was doing all of it and he did it well.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that is a really high expression of like these energies of finding a way to give healthy expression to the different sides of yourself, even if they contradict, because we all have that within ourselves. We have these contradictions, and sometimes it's hard to figure out how to work with that. Like, how can I be both? And, it's people like him who show us that like you can do that. You can be all the different things that you are.